My name is Mary and I'm 35 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon, which means I'm trained to walk into blood, panic, broken bones, screaming families, and still know exactly what must be done first. In the operating room, emotions are a liability. You don't feel, you calculate. You don't weep, you suture. But nothing in an operating room prepared me for the sound I heard when I came home 3 hours early that Tuesday afternoon. My daughter was sobbing inside my own house, the kind of terrified, muffled cry that makes a mother stop breathing before she even understands why. I pushed the front door open wider, my surgical bag slipping from my shoulder, and I froze just long enough to see a reality that felt like a hallucination. My father, Charles, was in my living room, standing over an 8-year-old child, yelling threats with a face purple from rage, while my older sister Rachel was tearing through my bedroom like a thief who already believed she owned the air I breathed. Drawers were ripped out and dumped. My mother's old jewelry box, a hand-carved mahogany chest I had guarded since her funeral, was missing from the dresser. Papers from my private file cabinet were scattered across the hallway like autumn leaves in a storm. Someone had searched for the deed, the apartment documents, and the blue folder I kept locked away for a reason that went far beyond money. For 1 second, the surgeon in me tried to triage the scene. Child first, exit second, threat level assessment third, evidence fourth. The mother in me wanted to scream, to run straight at them and tear the world apart. Instead, I forced my hand to be as steady as it was when I held a scalpel. I stepped back into the shadow beside the hallway, pulled out my phone with trembling fingers, and dialed 911 without making a sound. When the operator answered, I whispered into the receiver, my voice a jagged blade of ice, "My family broke into my house. They're threatening my 8-year-old daughter. They are robbing me. Send police now." Before I tell you what they were really searching for, and why the sirens outside ruined far more than just their afternoon, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like where you are? I'm curious to see how far this story of betrayal will travel. The operator told me to stay on the line, and I did. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to rush into that room, to put my body between my father and my child. Emma was only 8, but she was brave in the way children try to be brave when the adults they are supposed to trust turn into monsters. She was silent, stiff, sitting on the edge of the sofa with her small hands tucked under her legs, trying not to make things worse. Charles, a man who had taught me to ride a bike and then later taught me that his love always came with an invoice, stood over her. He had one hand braced on the wall, blocking the hallway as if my home, which I paid for with 80-hour work weeks, belonged to him by divine right. "Tell me where your mother keeps the blue folder," Charles barked, his voice echoing off the walls I had painted myself. "Don't act stupid, Emma. You've seen her with it. You've seen the keys." Emma's voice was a tiny, broken thread. "I don't know, Grandpa. Please don't yell. She's lying." Rachel's voice shrieked from the bedroom. I heard the wooden scrape of my heavy nightstand hitting the wall, followed by the sharp, sickening crack of a ceramic lamp breaking. Mary always hides things. Jewelry, contracts, bank papers. She thinks she's better than us because of that white coat. She thinks she can just sit on all that wealth while we struggle. My hand tightened around the phone. I was still half hidden behind the hallway corner, and the 911 operator could hear every word. In the trauma bay, panic kills people faster than the actual injured. I forced myself to breathe. I checked Charles's hands, no visible weapon. I checked Emma's distance from the door, too far. I looked into the bedroom through the crack in the doorframe and saw Rachel's designer bag on my bed, heavy and bulging. My mother's pearl necklace, the only thing I had left of her, was draped over the edge of the zipper. That necklace had been left to me in my mother's will, along with a small share in an apartment building she had quietly invested in years before she died. Charles had spent his life calling it family property, even though the paperwork explicitly said otherwise. Rachel had spent her life calling it unfair, even though she had received her own inheritance 5 years ago and burned through it in less than 36 months on failed businesses and luxury vacations. I had helped them more times than I could count. I paid Charles's property taxes once when he claimed the bank was at his door. I gave Rachel $15,000 for a divorce attorney she swore she'd pay back. I covered medical bills, car repairs, and emergency loans that were never emergencies once the check cleared. I had even missed Emma's school recital once because Charles called me in tears, saying his heart was failing and he couldn't afford the copay, only for me to learn later he used that money to finance a hunting trip in Montana. Each time, I told myself love meant patience. Each time, they learned that my guilt had a dollar amount. But I never signed over the house. I never gave them the apartment shares. And I never gave them access to the trust fund I had created for Emma's future. Now I understood why they had waited until my hospital schedule said I would be in surgery until 11 p.m. They didn't come to ask for help. They came to corner my child, steal my identity documents, and force a signature that would strip me of everything. Charles lowered his voice, but that made the hair on my neck stand up. Listen to me, little girl. Your mother is selfish. If she loved this family, she would help us. If she doesn't sign those papers, people are going to lose their homes. Do you want that on your conscience? Emma whispered, I want my mommy. That was the moment something inside me went completely still, not calm, but surgical. Precise. I had seen families collapse in waiting rooms when fear made them cruel. But this wasn't fear. This was a calculated raid. Rachel came out of the bedroom, clutching a stack of my documents. Found copies of the apartment agreement, she said, her eyes frantic and bright. But not the transfer certificate. She must have moved it to a safe. Charles cursed, a sound so vile it made Emma flinch. Then we wait. We wait right here until she gets home. We make her sign new ones. She won't say no with the kid involved. Rachel laughed, a bitter, breathless sound. You think she'll sign after she sees this mess? She'll call the cops. She won't, Charles said with a terrifying certainty. Not on her own father. Not on her only sister. She cares too much about her reputation at that hospital to have a public scandal. The operator's voice came quietly through my phone. Officers are 3 blocks away. Ma'am, are you safe? Not yet, I whispered. I lifted the phone just enough to keep recording and stepped into the living room. The silence that followed my entrance was heavy and suffocating. Emma saw me first. Her face changed so fast it nearly broke my heart. Hope, shame, fear, and relief all collided in her eyes. Charles spun around, his face shifting from a snarl to a mask of false authority in a split second. Rachel, standing by the hallway, tried to hide the documents behind her back, but she was too slow. Mary, Charles barked, as if I was the intruder in my own home. You're home early. Good. We need to talk. Emma, come here, I said. My voice didn't shake. It was the voice I used when a patient was coding, total authority, zero emotion. Charles shifted his weight, trying to block the path between me and my daughter. She's fine, Mary. We were just having a family discussion. You've been ignoring my calls. Emma. Now, I repeated. Emma scrambled off the couch and ran to me, burying her face in my scrubs. I could feel her heart racing against my leg. I raised my phone, showing them the screen. Are you recording us? Rachel shrieked, her voice hitting a glass-shattering pitch. You psycho, you're recording your own family? No, I said, looking her dead in the eyes. I'm recording 2 burglars who broke into my house, stole my mother's jewelry, and threatened an 8-year-old. And since the 911 operator is still on the line, they're recording you too. Charles took a step toward me, his hand raised as if he was going to slap the phone out of my hand. Careful how you talk to your father, Mary. You've always been ungrateful. We made sacrifices for you to go to medical school. You didn't make sacrifices, I shot back. I worked 3 jobs while taking 20 credits. You took out a second mortgage on your house to buy a boat while I was eating ramen in a dorm room. The only thing you've ever sacrificed is my peace of mind. Rachel threw the folder onto the coffee table, paper sliding across the glass. Everything is always about you, isn't it? The big, successful doctor. You have millions in equity in that building and you won't even give us enough to cover Dad's debts? You're disgusting. I have given you over $100,000 in 5 years, Rachel. Where did it go? Because I know it didn't go to Dad's debts. I saw the pictures of your trip to Dubai. The color drained from her face. At that moment, the first faint wail of a siren cut through the air. It was distant, but coming fast. Charles's eyes widened. He hadn't expected me to actually call the police. He thought my doctor's reputation made me weak. He thought my love for my family was a cage. He was about to find out it was a shield. Mary, hang up that phone, Charles ordered. Tell them it was a mistake. Now. Before you ruin everything. The only people who ruined anything are the ones who scared my daughter, I said. Rachel grabbed her bag, her movements frantic. She started heading for the back door, but I stepped into her path. I am a surgeon, I spend 10 hours a day on my feet. I am stronger than she thinks. Get out of my way, she hissed. No. You're staying right here until the police see what's in that bag. The sirens were deafening now. Blue and red lights began to strobe against the living room walls. Charles looked at the front door, then at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him look afraid of me. He realized I wasn't the reliable Mary who fixed everyone's mistakes anymore. The front door kicked open, and 2 officers burst in, their hands on their holsters. Police. Nobody move. Officers. Charles cried out, his voice suddenly trembling with a fake, elderly frailty. Thank God you're here. My daughter, she's having some kind of mental breakdown. She's threatening us. It was a classic Charles move. The gaslighting. The redirection. But he forgot one thing, I was still holding the phone. I looked at the officer, a tall man named Williams, and handed him the device. Officer, I am Dr. Mary. This is my home. This man and woman broke in while I was at the hospital. They have my stolen property in that bag, and they were attempting to force me to sign legal documents. My daughter was their witness. Officer Williams took the phone, listened for 5 seconds, and his face hardened. He looked at Rachel, who was still clutching her bag like a life preserver. Ma'am, set the bag on the floor and step away. It's my bag, she screamed. She's trying to frame me. When they forced the bag open, they didn't just find the pearls. They found my social security card. They found a spare set of my car keys. They found my passport. And they found a series of documents I had never seen before, loan applications in my name, totaling over $400,000, with signatures that looked exactly like mine. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a robbery. This was a total identity takeover. I looked at Rachel, who was now being handcuffed, and then at the documents on the floor. What did you do? I whispered. Rachel didn't look at me. She looked at our father. And Charles didn't look at either of us. He looked at the floor, his jaw set in a cold, hard line. You don't understand, Rachel yelled as she was led toward the door. I had to do it. I'm part of that family now, Mary. You would have destroyed everything if I didn't become you. What family, Rachel? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. What are you talking about? She looked back over her shoulder, a manic glint in her eyes. The Sterlings. I married Julian Sterling. And if they find out I'm not the Dr. Mary they think I am, I'm dead. And so are you. The name Sterling hit me like a physical blow. The Sterling family owned half the real estate in the city. They were billionaires. And apparently, my sister had married into their dynasty using my name, my degree, and my life. But as the police car door slammed shut, I realized the theft went much deeper than a name. Rachel hadn't just stolen my identity to marry a billionaire, she had used my medical license to sign off on something that was going to cost lives. As I stood in my trashed living room, holding my trembling daughter, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered it, expecting the police station. Instead, a cold, aristocratic voice spoke. Mary? This is Julian's father. We need to talk about the irregularities in the surgical reports you submitted for the estate's new clinic. People are starting to ask questions, and your sister isn't answering her phone. I looked at the documents on the floor, then at the empty space where my life used to be. My sister had married a billionaire as me, and she had just handed me the bill for a crime I didn't commit. This was only the beginning of the nightmare. I didn't speak for a full minute after the line went dead. The silence in my living room felt different now. It wasn't just the aftermath of a break-in, it was the quiet before a landslide. My hands, usually steady enough to repair a ruptured aorta, were trembling. I looked at the phone, then at the documents scattered like shrapnel across my floor. Julian's father. The Sterlings. My sister hadn't just stolen my jewelry, she had colonized my entire existence and planted her flag in the middle of a billionaire dynasty. Mom? Who was that? Emma's voice was small, pulling me back from the edge of the abyss. Just a work call, honey, I lied, though my heart was screaming. I knelt down and pulled her into a hug, feeling her small heart racing against mine. I had to be the surgeon now. Triage the situation. Stop the bleeding. Emma was safe for the moment. The police had Rachel and Charles, but the infection had already spread far beyond this house. I called Kevin. He was more than my attorney, he was the man who had helped me navigate the complex legalities of my mother's estate when Charles tried to drain it years ago. When I explained what had just happened, the break-in, the arrest, and the bone-chilling phone call from the Sterling patriarch, Kevin's voice lost its usual professional warmth. Mary, listen to me very carefully, Kevin said. If Rachel has been using your medical license and your name to sign off on clinical reports for a family like the Sterlings, this isn't just identity theft anymore. This is high-level fraud. If those irregularities the father mentioned involve patient care or financial Medicare filings, the board won't just suspend you, they'll come for your freedom. I haven't even met these people, Kevin. I've been in the OR at the Memorial Hospital 16 hours a day for the last 3 years. It doesn't matter what you did. It matters what the paper trail says you did. I'm coming over. Don't touch anything the police didn't already process. While I waited for Kevin, I sat on the floor and began to piece together the timeline. Rachel had always been a master of the long con. She had spent the last year asking me oddly specific questions about my shifts, my favorite medical journals, even the names of my old residency advisors. I thought she was finally taking an interest in my life. In reality, she was studying for a role. She had dyed her hair to match mine, mirrored my wardrobe, and apparently, found a billionaire who wanted a brilliant trauma surgeon as a trophy wife. But why me? Why not just be herself? Because Rachel had a criminal record for check-kiting in her 20s that she'd never managed to expunge. She couldn't pass a background check for a high-society marriage, let alone a medical board. So she became Mary. She became the woman with the clean record, the MD, and the respected reputation. The front door opened again 2 hours later. It wasn't Kevin. It was Detective Harris. She looked tired, her coat damp from the sudden evening rain. Dr. Mary, she said, stepping over a pile of discarded books. We just finished the initial intake with your sister and father. Your father is demanding a private lawyer, but your sister, she's talking. A lot. What is she saying? I asked, my voice cold. She's claiming that you gave her permission. She's saying you were burned out and wanted to take a sabbatical, so you coached her on how to fill in for you at the Sterling family's private clinic projects in exchange for a cut of the marriage settlement. I felt a surge of nausea. That's insane. I have a daughter to support. I love my job. Why would I risk everything I built? I believe you, Harris said, her eyes softening for a second. But she has emails, Mary. Hundreds of them. Sent from an account with your name, discussing the handover. She has digital signatures. And she has the $400,000 in loans. She's telling the investigators that you spent the money on a gambling debt you were hiding from the hospital. The room spun. Rachel hadn't just stolen my identity, she had built a secondary, dark version of me to act as her fall guy. If her life as Dr. Mary ever collapsed, she had already ensured that the real Mary would look like a disgraced, debt-ridden fraud. Kevin arrived moments later, his briefcase heavy with what I knew would be a long night of damage control. He and Detective Harris spoke in low tones in the kitchen while I stayed with Emma, trying to keep her occupied with a movie, though I could see her eyes darting to the door every time a floorboard creaked. "Mary, come here," Kevin called out. I walked into the kitchen. He had his laptop open, showing a series of corporate filings. The Sterling Medical Group. It's a private entity owned by Julian Sterling's father. They've been developing a high-end concierge surgical center. According to these public filings, the lead medical consultant and signatory for the state health permits is Dr. Mary. "I've never signed a permit for them," I whispered. "No, but someone using your credentials did," Kevin said, his face grim. "And here's the kicker. 2 weeks ago, a patient at that clinic had a major postoperative complication. The Dr. Mary on record signed off on a procedure that used an unapproved medical device. The patient is currently in a coma. The family is preparing a lawsuit. A big one." The blood drained from my face. As a trauma surgeon, I knew the weight of a life. I knew the precision required for every cut. Rachel didn't know a scalpel from a butter knife. She had played God with a human life while wearing my name, and now that the patient was dying, she was ready to hand the consequences to me. That's what the phone call was about, I realized aloud. The father knows something is wrong. He doesn't know she's an imposter yet, he thinks I'm a negligent doctor who's trying to dodge a malpractice suit. "We have to go to them," I said, my voice hardening. "I need to look Julian Sterling in the eye and show him exactly who he married." "Not yet," Kevin warned. "If you walk in there without a strategy, their lawyers will chew you up to protect their own interests. They might even be in on it. We don't know how much Julian knows." But I couldn't wait. My license, my career, my freedom, it was all tied to a woman currently sitting in a holding cell and a man who thought he was my husband. The next morning, after making sure Emma was safe with a trusted neighbor and an off-duty officer Kevin had hired for security, I drove to the Sterling estate. It was a fortress of glass and limestone overlooking the valley, a place that screamed old money and impenetrable power. I pulled up to the gate, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The security guard looked at my ID, then at me. He frowned, confused. "Dr. Mary? I thought you were. I mean, the car is different." "Open the gate," I said, using my operating room voice, the one that commanded residents and saved lives. It worked. I drove up the long, winding driveway. When I stepped out of the car, a man was standing on the front steps. He was tall, mid-30s, with the kind of effortless elegance that only comes from never having to worry about a bill. This was Julian Sterling. My sister's husband. He looked at me, and for a split second, his face went completely blank. Then, a look of pure, unadulterated horror washed over him. He looked at my scrubs, my tired eyes, the way I held myself. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm the woman you thought you married," I said, stepping closer. "My name is Mary. I'm a trauma surgeon. And I think it's time we talked about my sister, Rachel." Julian didn't move. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Rachel? No, my wife is Mary. She's inside. She's been distraught since the accident at the clinic. She told me her crazy sister was trying to extort her." The depth of the manipulation was staggering. Rachel had preemptively poisoned the well. She had told him I was the unstable one, the one to be feared. "Julian," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "Ask her what the AAA stands for in a vascular emergency. Ask her to name the 7 layers of the abdominal wall she supposedly cut through last month. Or better yet, just look at this." I handed him my original passport and my medical board certification, the ones I had kept in the blue folder they hadn't found. He took them, his hands shaking. He looked at the dates. He looked at the photos. She's in jail, Julian, I said. The police arrested her at my house last night after she broke in to steal the rest of my life. If there's a woman inside that house right now, she's not my sister, and she's definitely not me. Julian's face went from pale to a dangerous, ashen gray. There is no one inside, he choked out. She left this morning. She said she was going to handle the irregularities with my father. She took the keys to the private vault. My stomach dropped. The private vault. Rachel wasn't just running, she was looting. Before I could respond, a black SUV pulled up the driveway at a breakneck speed. A man stepped out, older, stern, with eyes like flint. Julian's father. He didn't even look at Julian. He looked straight at me. You, he barked. We have a problem. The patient in the coma? He just woke up and the first thing he said was that the doctor who treated him didn't look anything like the woman in the wedding photos. He stopped, looking from me to Julian, then back to me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The irregularities weren't just on paper. The Sterlings had been scammed by a master, and they had led her into the very heart of their empire. Where is she? The father demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. I don't know, Julian whispered. She took the vault keys, Dad. She's gone. No, I said, looking at the documents the father was clutching. She's not just gone. She's left a trail of medical malpractice that's going to lead straight to my front door unless we stop her. She has my name, my license, and your money. And she's had months to plan her exit. I looked at the Sterling men, two of the most powerful people in the city, reduced to silence by the ghost of a woman who never existed. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my name anymore. I was fighting a war on two fronts. One against the sister who wanted to be me, and one against the family who might destroy me just to bury their own embarrassment. Detective Harris is on her way, I said, pulling out my phone. But before she gets here, you're going to show me those surgical reports. Because if someone is dying because of what my sister did in my name, I'm the only one who can actually save them. The father hesitated, his pride warring with his desperation. Finally, he nodded. Inside. Now. As I walked into the Sterling mansion, a place of cold marble and stolen identities, I knew part one of this nightmare was over, the truth was out. But part two was just beginning, the part where I had to perform surgery on a life that wasn't mine, before the irregularities turned into a body count. The Sterling's private study felt less like a room and more like a mausoleum for a reputation that was currently being cremated. I didn't wait for permission. I grabbed the leather-bound medical folder from the mahogany desk and flipped it open. My eyes scanned the charts, the vital signs, and the surgical narrative. As a trauma surgeon, I read these reports the way most people read the morning news, looking for the headline. And the headline here was a death sentence. Who performed this cholecystectomy? I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. Julian's father, a man whose name I now knew was Arthur Sterling, didn't look at his son. You did. Or rather, the woman we thought was you. 2 weeks ago. I felt a surge of nausea. A cholecystectomy, gallbladder removal. To a trained surgeon, it's routine. To an imposter with a YouTube-level understanding of anatomy, it's a minefield. I looked at the post-operative notes. Tachycardia. Low-grade fever. Bile-stained drainage. She didn't just steal my name, I whispered, the weight of the realization hitting me. She tried to play God with a scalpel. I turned to Arthur, my eyes blazing. This patient isn't just waking up and noticing a difference in appearance. He's septic. This report shows a clear bile duct injury that was sutured shut instead of repaired. He's dying, Mr. Sterling. And if he dies with my signature on his chart. Julian stepped forward, his face a mask of crumbling privilege. Mary, she was so convincing. She knew your medical school anecdotes. She knew about the scar on your knee from the bike accident when you were 12. She had your journals, your old textbooks. Because she stole them from my storage unit while I was working double shifts to pay for our father's emergencies, I snapped. I didn't have time for his heartbreak. I had a victim to save. Where is the patient? The Sterling wing at Mercy General, Arthur said, his voice regaining some of its flinty authority. But we can't just walk in there and tell them the surgeon was a fraud. The liability alone. The liability? I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. Arthur, you have a woman who isn't a doctor, who married your son under a false identity, and who has now committed what amounts to aggravated assault with a medical instrument in your private facility. You're worried about liability? I'm worried about a murder charge being attached to my license. I pulled out my phone and dialed Detective Harris. Detective? We have a situation. Rachel isn't in custody. She's on the move with the Sterling vault keys, and she's left a trail of medical malpractice that's about to turn into a homicide. I need you at Mercy General, now. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from Kevin, my attorney. It was a photo of a bank alert * withdrawal, $250,000. Location, downtown private branch *. She's emptying the accounts, I told the Sterling men. But she isn't doing it alone. My father, Charles, he's the one who knew my schedules. He's the one who knew exactly which blue folder contained my original credentials. He didn't just break into my house to steal jewelry, he was the inside man for this entire charade. The drive to Mercy General was a blur of high-speed turns and the suffocating scent of Julian's expensive cologne. He sat in the passenger seat of his own SUV, staring out the window. I loved her, he whispered. I thought I found someone who was brilliant, grounded, a hero in the operating room, and it was all a script. It was my life, I said, not looking at him. The hero part, that was me. The grounded part? That was her pretending to be me while she lived off your family's billions. You didn't fall in love with a woman, Julian. You fell in love with a stolen resume. We burst through the doors of the Sterling wing like a storm. The head of nursing tried to stop us, but Arthur Sterling's presence acted like a master key. We reached room 402. Inside lay a man in his 50s, his skin a terrifying shade of jaundiced yellow, his breathing shallow and labored. Mr. Henderson, Arthur whispered. He's my oldest friend. My CFO. I moved to the bedside, my surgeon instincts taking over. I checked the drain. It was dark, foul-smelling. I checked the chart. The surgeon, my sister, had ordered massive doses of painkillers to mask the symptoms of the infection she had caused. Get a surgical kit and an oar ready, I barked at the nurse. Who are you? The nurse asked, looking at my scrubs which were still wrinkled from my own shift earlier that morning. I'm Dr. Mary. The real one. Before the nurse could protest, Detective Harris walked in, 2 uniformed officers in tow. Mr. Sterling, we need to talk about your vault. We just got a hit on your security system. A woman matching Rachel's description was seen leaving the estate in a silver Mercedes 3 minutes ago. She didn't just take cash. She took the Sterling family jewels, the ones that aren't insured for public display. I don't care about the jewels. Julian shouted. I do, I said, looking at the monitors. Because if she has those jewels, she has enough liquid capital to disappear forever. And she's doing it while this man dies in my name. I looked at Harris. Detective, I need to get into that or. I am the only one who knows exactly how she would have fumbled that surgery because I know her mistakes. I know she's right-handed but clumsy. I know she never understood the depth of the hepatic duct. You can't operate here, the hospital administrator said, appearing in the doorway, his face pale. The paperwork, the credentials. I have my board certification in my bag, I said, slamming the blue folder onto the bedside table. And I have the Sterling family's permission. Arthur? Arthur Sterling looked at his dying friend, then at me. For the first time, he saw me not as a scandal to be managed, but as the only person who could stop the bleeding. Do it. I'll handle the board. The next 3 hours were a descent into a specific kind of hell. As I scrubbed in, my mind was split. Half of me was in the anatomy of the man on the table, and the other half was wondering where Emma was. I had left her with a trusted neighbor, but if Rachel was truly desperate, if Charles was truly her accomplice. I stepped into the OR. When I opened the patient's abdomen, a collective gasp went up from the surgical assistants. It was a disaster. Rachel hadn't just made a mistake, she had panicked. When she hit a bleeder, she hadn't clamped it correctly. She had used a non-dissolvable suture on a structure that required delicate reconstruction. It was a butcher's job disguised as a surgeon's work. Suction, I commanded. We're going to be here a while. As I worked, the silence of the OR was punctuated only by the rhythmic beep of the vitals. Every time the heart rate flickered, I felt the phantom of my sister's hand over mine, not to help, but to sabotage. She had used my hands, my name, my life to commit this crime. Every stitch I placed was an act of reclamation. I wasn't just saving Mr. Henderson. I was suturing my own identity back together. Doctor, the anesthesiologist whispered. Vitals are stabilizing. The leak is contained. Not yet, I said. We need to irrigate the entire cavity. The sepsis is deep. It was nearly 4 a.m. when I finally stepped out of the OR, my mask hanging around my neck, my hands shaking with exhaustion. Julian was waiting in the hallway. He held a tablet in his hand. She's been spotted, he said, his voice trembling. At the private airfield. But she wasn't alone, Mary. He turned the tablet toward me. It was a grainy security feed from 20 minutes ago. A woman in a blonde wig, Rachel, was walking toward a small jet. Behind her, carrying a heavy suitcase, was my father, Charles. But it was the third person that made my heart stop. A small figure in a pink jacket. Emma. My world tilted. The irregularities Rachel was handling weren't just financial. She knew I was closing in. She knew the Sterlings were onto her. And she had used the one person I would never sacrifice to ensure her escape. They took her from the neighbor's house, Detective Harris said, appearing from the shadows of the hallway. They told the sitter there was a family emergency. The sitter knew your father, so she let her go. I grabbed the edge of the nurse's station to keep from falling. Where is that plane going? International waters first, Harris said, her jaw set tight. But they have a flight plan filed for the Caymans. We flagged the tail number, but they're on a private runway. They have clearance to take off in 10 minutes. Julian, I said, turning to him, my voice a low, dangerous growl. Your family owns that airfield, don't they? We own the land, Julian said, the realization dawning on him. And the fuel contracts. Stop that plane, I commanded. I don't care if you have to block the runway with a fleet of SUVs. I don't care if you have to cut the power to the entire tower. If my sister leaves this ground with my daughter, I will destroy everything your family has built. I will testify to every single irregularity you tried to hide tonight. I will make sure the Sterling name is synonymous with identity theft and medical murder. Arthur Sterling walked up behind his son. He had heard everything. He looked at me, then at the tablet showing my daughter being led into a cage of clouds. Julian, Arthur said. Call the hangar. Tell them there's a mechanical failure on the fuel lines. Ground everything. He then looked at me. And Dr. Mary? Get in the car. We're going to get your daughter. The drive to the airfield was a nightmare of sirens and speed. I sat in the back of the police cruiser this time, Detective Harris at the wheel. Every second felt like an hour. My mind kept replaying the image of Emma's pink jacket. She was 8 years old. She had already seen her grandfather threaten her in her own living room. Now, she was being kidnapped by the aunt who wanted to be her mother. She won't hurt her, Mary, Harris said, though she didn't sound convinced. She needs her as a shield. That's exactly why she's in danger, I whispered. Rachel doesn't see people. She sees assets. And right now, Emma is the only asset she has left that I can't replace. We screeched onto the tarmac just as the lights of the private jet began to taxi. The roar of the engines was a physical weight against my chest. Suddenly, the airfield went dark. Arthur had kept his word. The runway lights flickered and died, plunged into the midnight black of the Montana plains. The jet slowed, its nose wheel swerving as the pilot lost his guidance. Two Sterling security SUVs roared across the grass, swerving in front of the plane, their high beams blinding the cockpit. Police! Engines off! Harris screamed over the megaphone as we jumped from the car. The cabin door of the jet remained closed for a long, agonizing minute. Then, it slowly creaked open. My father, Charles, stepped out first. He looked old, pathetic, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender that I had seen too many times before. It was her idea, he shouted over the wind. She told me we were just going on a trip, she said Mary gave permission. Shut up, Charles. Harris yelled. Where is the girl? Then, Rachel appeared. She wasn't wearing the wig anymore. Her hair was a mess, her expensive designer coat stained with sweat. She held Emma in front of her, one hand gripped tightly around my daughter's arm. Emma was crying, her eyes wide and fixed on me. Stay back. Rachel screamed. I have the papers. I have the power of attorney. I'm her legal guardian on the Sterling records. If you touch me, I'll claim kidnapping. You aren't anyone, Rachel. I shouted, stepping into the circle of light. The man you operated on is alive. He told them everything. The Sterlings know. The police know. There is no Dr. Mary for you to hide behind anymore. There is only a thief and a failure. Rachel's face contorted with a rage so pure it looked like a physical deformity. I could have been you. I was the one who stayed behind to take care of Mom while you were at med school. I was the one who listened to Dad's drinking stories for years. I deserved this life. I earned it. You earned a prison cell, I said, taking a step forward. Let go of my daughter. Don't come any closer. Rachel pulled Emma back toward the edge of the stairs. I'll jump. We'll both fall. Emma looked at me, her voice a tiny, broken sob. Mommy. That was the moment the surgeon in me died and the mother took complete control. I didn't look at the police. I didn't look at the Sterling billions. I looked at my sister, the woman who had spent 30 years trying to hollow out my life so she could live inside it. You want my life, Rachel? I said, my voice eerily calm. You want the burden of it? Then take the responsibility. If you jump, if you hurt her, you're not just a fraud. You're a murderer. And you know what happens to murderers in this state? They don't get private jets. They don't get Sterling jewelry. They get a needle in their arm in a cold room. Is that the identity you want to steal next? Rachel wavered. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She looked at the dark horizon, then at the shivering child in her arms, then at the father who had already abandoned her to stand with his hands up. She realized, for the first time in her life, that there was no one left to lie to. She shoved Emma toward the stairs. Take her. Take the brat. She won't stop crying anyway. Emma stumbled down the metal steps, and I caught her before her feet even hit the pavement. I pulled her into me, burying my face in her hair, the scent of her shampoo the only thing that felt real in a world made of marble and lies. Detective Harris and the officers swarmed the plane. Rachel didn't fight. She sat down on the top step and stared at her hands, the hands that had tried to perform surgery, the hands that had signed stolen checks, the hands that were now being cuffed in cold, heavy steel. As they led her past me, she stopped. She looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the little girl who used to share a bedroom with me. You always got everything, Mary, she whispered. I worked for everything, Rachel, I replied. There's a difference. As the police cars pulled away, taking my sister and my father into the night, Julian Sterling approached me. He looked at Emma, then at me. The annulment papers are already being drafted, he said quietly. My father is, he's making a substantial donation to the hospital's trauma unit. In your name. The real one. Keep your money, Julian, I said, picking Emma up. Just make sure your lawyers don't try to bury what she did to Mr. Henderson. He deserves the truth. And so do I. I walked toward the car, my daughter's arms wrapped tightly around my neck. The nightmare of the stolen identity was over, but as I looked at the dark sky, I knew that part 3 was just the beginning of the recovery. We had survived the surgery. Now, we had to survive the healing. But as we drove away from the airfield, my phone chimed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Mary, a voice whispered. It was a woman's voice, old and frail. Is it true? Is she gone? I froze. I knew that voice. It was my mother's nurse from the hospice facility, the one who had died 3 years ago. Or so I had been told. Who is this? I asked, my heart beginning to race all over again. It's Martha. Your father, he told us you didn't want to see her. He told us you signed the papers to move her to the private facility in the mountains. But Mary, the woman who comes to visit her, she isn't you. And she just arrived with a suitcase. I looked at the receding lights of the police cars. Rachel was in custody. My father was in custody. So who was at a private facility in the mountains, visiting a mother I thought was dead? The identity theft hadn't started a year ago. It had started years ago. And the biggest lie of all wasn't about a billionaire husband, it was about the woman who had brought us into this world. Drive back, I told Harris, my voice trembling. We're not done. The real story is just starting. We didn't wait for morning. Detective Harris kept his sirens off as we sped toward the mountains, but the silence inside the car was louder than any alarm. Kevin was on the speakerphone, already pulling the death certificate my father had filed 3 years ago. Mary, Kevin's voice was grim, the doctor who signed this doesn't exist. The facility listed on the paperwork burned down in the 90s. They didn't just lie, they erased her. When we arrived at Pinecrest, a secluded, high-end care home hidden behind miles of pine trees, the night nurse tried to stop us. But when I showed her my medical ID and Harris showed his badge, the color drained from her face. I didn't wait for her to lead the way. I followed the scent of antiseptic and lilies until I reached room 212. I pushed the door open. There, sitting by a window overlooking the dark woods, was a woman who looked like a ghost of the person I remembered. She was frail, her hair a shock of white, but when she turned, I saw my own eyes looking back at me. Mary, she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. You're late. Your sister said you were in surgery. I fell to my knees by her bed, clutching her hands that were still warm, still real. The fake Mary who had been visiting her, keeping her drugged and isolated while Charles and Rachel drained her estate, had been my sister. Rachel hadn't just stolen my future with the Sterlings, she had stolen my mother's final years, telling her I was too busy with my career as a trauma surgeon to visit, all while using my name to sign the checks that kept her hidden. The aftermath was a clinical execution of justice. With the evidence of faked death and kidnapping added to the identity theft and fraud, Kevin and Detective Harris didn't just close the case, they buried Charles and Rachel under it. Julian Sterling, horrified by the monster he had nearly tethered his family to, handed over every recorded conversation and bank transfer Rachel had ever made. In court, Rachel tried to scream that I was the one who had abandoned the family, but the judge silenced her with a single look at the medical records. Charles sat in the defendant's chair, a broken old man who had gambled his soul and lost. They both received sentences that ensured they would never see the sun from outside a barred window again. I brought my mother home. It took months for Emma to understand that the grandmother she thought was an angel in heaven was actually the woman sitting in our garden, but children are resilient, we are healing. As a trauma surgeon, I know that recovery is often more painful than the injury itself, but it is the only way to survive. My name is Mary. I have my daughter, I have my mother, and for the first time in my life, I have a name that no one can steal. Before you go, I have to ask, if you found out your family had built a mountain of lies just to steal your light, would you have the courage to burn the mountain down? What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.